second event of our event series. My name is Rama and I'm an executive for the Advertising, Marketing and PR division. I will be co-hosting our event today with Anita, who is our division head, and Nat, who is the director of the Business Society. Today our guest speaker is Heidi, who is from the business school. She's a senior teaching fellow. She has a vast amount of experience, and I can't wait for all of you to see her brilliant presentation. Just a little mention, if you could please put your questions for those watching online on YouTube in the comments, and we will be asking questions towards the end. So yeah, thank you, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Rama, and thank you, Anita, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight about how to be successful in an interview. Hopefully I'll be offering some hints and tips that will help you. I think interviews are something that have been part of the recruitment process and applying for jobs for years, but we're obviously in a pretty new environment now, in the sense that some of the old rules apply and now some new rules, in fact, are applying to the situation. I think with that in mind, a little bit of context might be helpful. So I just wanted to share a little bit about the recruitment market right now, particularly kind of the graduate labour market. So this is something from the US Chamber of Commerce, very recent. This was something that came out in September. There was a lot of talk when we went into the pandemic about what the recovery might look like, and there was talks, I remember it being a kind of a very sharp V shape, i.e. a steep decline, but then a rapid recovery. And I think that might have been based on an optimistic, a glass half full view that this might be a shorter term phenomenon and that we'd have found some more answers by now. But unfortunately we're into kind of a more medium long term situation, and indeed we're now looking at being in a second wave of coronavirus, and so this is very much a moving feast. So in terms of what this means for all of us and for the labour market, as I say, this is changing all the time for the UK economy, indeed the global economy. But what the Chamber of Commerce are now suggesting is we might expect something of more of a kind of a K-shaped recovery. So we see two very different trajectories. And we'll see in the blue line, for example, in health, legal, professional services, public sector, that we'll see those sectors recover more strongly, and we're already seeing that they're tending to be a little more resilient, and also those areas allow people to work remotely, and where people can work remotely effectively, that tends to be more helpful in terms of how those sectors can recover. And I don't think it'll be a surprise to anybody that in terms of those sectors that are struggling more are sectors such as culture, including entertainment, for example, concerts, theatre, some aspects of the food industry, restaurants and bars, retail, the high street, for example, and travel. So it's just to indicate that, as I say, it's very much a moving feast, but something we might all want to bear in mind is kind of which sectors are we focusing on when we're thinking about our future careers. To illustrate this a little bit further, this slide refers to the resilience of different sectors for graduate vacancies, but these same kind of rules apply when we're thinking about placements in internship and recruitment in general. You'll see I've highlighted in the centre there that for graduates it's actually the most positive picture. What we're looking for here is green, and that means the least change, the least negative change, and there's actually some positive change you can see here in the health sector, even for non-graduates, but on the whole, in the centre, it's a better picture if you are a graduate or indeed looking to be a graduate in the future. And again, we can see the sectors that are holding up better than the others. This data does come from a few months ago. It's a survey of employers conducted by the Institute of Student Employers back in April and May. And even though from when we're looking at data, something as recent as May, just a few months ago, seems very current, of course, with swiftly moving times, things are changing rapidly, as I've already indicated. And they currently have just closed another survey, and in early November are going to be releasing those results. So I think the overall theme here is that, you know, graduate recruitment continues, but it's taking a bashing. It's a tougher market, but I think there's an opportunity to be glass half full here. So something else the ISE found was that even though there was an overall fall in graduate vacancies back towards the end of the spring, beginning of the summer, was down 23%, actually the way to look at it is that over 75% of recruitment was still happening. Again, we're seeing shift, we're seeing strengthening coming through in some sectors and some roles, and some are falling off more. One of the concerns that employers have is this perception, if we have this very negative perception of what's going on and everything we're hearing in the media, we assume the opportunities aren't there, or we assume they're going to be so competitive that we won't be the person to secure that role. And certainly evidence suggests, again, the competition is very strong for graduate roles, but you should never let that put you off, because it's not for you to decide whether you're the right person for the role, because we don't know exactly what the employer wants. At the time of the 2009 financial crash, 50% of the associate of graduate recruiters members didn't fill all of their vacancies. So again, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But what does this mean for you? Well, I think it's tough on our students at the moment. I know a lot of you would be gaining practical work experience in Guildford, say, or back home, working in shops, restaurants in the high street in Guildford, and we know those industries have very much been hit. What is a positive, I think, is that employers have really shifted to virtual offerings. So in the beginning of the pandemic, they were saying, oh my goodness, can we still offer internships or placements? But what they were doing is a lot of them were quickly turning those around into virtual internships, sometimes of shorter duration. But equally, the good news there is that those could be more inclusive, because it didn't require you to relocate to London for a number of weeks to avail yourself of that opportunity. And it also meant that more people can partake in a virtual placement. They can offer those roles to more students than if it was a physical opportunity. Obviously, there's been a shift to remote working. We've heard an awful lot about this. This is going to be a trend for the future, I think, or very much a hybrid approach, where there's both physical working and working remotely. And this applies in the recruitment process very much as well. Some companies are having the entire process be online, and so that's something we need to be ready for. Sometimes right at the end you have the opportunity to go into the office, and it's a challenge, because I think when we're choosing a role, it's hard to appreciate the organisation and the culture if we can't go in and experience it and meet the people for ourselves. As a result of this, digital skills are absolutely key, and that's about engaging online with recruiters, both as part of that application process as you're trying to secure roles, but beyond that, as we're working, my job has changed dramatically, and I did a talk earlier this week that's actually going to take place next week, but that's not going to be in person, and usually it would be, and so that was something I had to record. And a lot of my day-to-day working life, I'm now having meetings on MS Teams, Zoom, etc., as so many roles are. So again, how we engage professionally is really key, and that's something that employers are very interested in. So what can you do to improve your chances going forward? Focus on the resilient sectors that I've already touched on. Ensure you are digitally literate and professional for recruitment and remote working. And I think just a little bit of a word about that. I think it's really helpful that as students right now you're experiencing this hybrid approach to teaching, where you have to engage kind of online with your studies. But it's also worth saying how that looks isn't always how it would look if you were engaging with an employer, whether they be colleagues or on a recruitment basis. And a very simple thing is, if you're engaging with an employer, you would always have your camera on. You know, that would be a difference. And then what image are you presenting there? And that's something I want to talk about in the course of this talk. Update and be active on your LinkedIn page. Hopefully you all have a LinkedIn profile. It is valuable only if it's active. You know, I was listening to a presentation from a large employer yesterday who recruits best part of 2,000 graduates a year, I think was their figure, and they were saying they look at your LinkedIn profile, but if you're not active on it, if you haven't recently been there, if you're not posting stuff, if you're not linking with people and communicating, then they don't expect you to engage with them, and it makes you less attractive to them. Prepare for virtual interviews and assessment centres, so you're in the right place. That's what I want to really focus in on today, but I think it's worth saying that a lot of the kind of the practices and things I'm going to be talking about apply for interviews, they apply for assessment centres, they're going to apply when you're filling out application forms, so there's more general kind of application in terms of these kind of efforts that we put in. I think I want to emphasise we see all sorts of qualities and competencies that employers look for, but really key words right now about adaptability. I've heard adaptability and resilience, and you all have heard a lot about it, even I think going back to school. But now there really is that emphasis on being adaptable, being open to change, and being resilient. So how can you best prepare for your virtual interviews? Do research. Preparation is everything. So you will always need, now whether it's a virtual interview, a lot of what I'll say will apply to both virtual and in-person interviews. You must do your research. Research the role. Research the organisation itself. Research the sector and industry. You want to know it really well. Employers will have that baseline expectation of you. They will want to know why them specifically, why this specific role, and why you're a good fit for those. What are their values? What's their culture? What are their strengths? So again, you need to do your research. And if your starting point is just their website, it's a place to start, but you should be going beyond that. You should be being more proactive than that, reaching out to people through LinkedIn, people at the organisation if you possibly can, connecting into your networks, whether it be alumni, other students who perhaps worked at the organisation, everything that you can possibly do to kind of deep dive into that organisation and show that you have a better understanding of them and what you're applying for and what that's going to look like. What strengths and competencies are they looking for? So your job is to get in the mind of that recruiter, follow the trail of breadcrumbs, follow the clues to say, what is it that they want from me? And obviously the job ad is the obvious place to start, to understand what's this picture they've got in this head of this person they want. And I like to use kind of the metaphor I think a lot of us have in our head, the image of our dream partner, for example, and actually when you meet your person, they don't necessarily match up to this list, and actually you realise that was a nonsensical list kind of in the first place. But it's based in something, and I tend to think employers are the same. Their job ad is a wish list really of the perfect person, and why wouldn't they put together this profile of the perfect person, because that's what they should be aiming for. But when you're applying for jobs, you might find that you don't fit every single feature that they're talking about, and that's absolutely fine too. Don't apply for something you're not a fit for at all. But I think understanding that it's kind of a wish list, and there are some things that if you're the right person and the right fit, and that can be more about your personality and how you'll fit into the team, then it's less relevant whether you tick absolutely every box. But you won't be able to establish that if you haven't kind of done your research and understood what they're looking for. And finally, I think in terms of this kind of first research preparation stage for interviews, prepare scenarios and examples. You don't know what they're going to ask you about, but what you do know going into an interview is that they're going to want to be finding out about you, what makes you tick, how you think, what drives you, what you're passionate about, what your strengths are, what you shy away from. And the only way they're going to understand that is by trying to get inside your head and understand the experiences you've had. And the better way for them to understand what you've done is to understand from your experiences examples that demonstrate how you might be if you're working for them. And that's what they're wanting you to project yourself into that role. And so what I do whenever I'm preparing for an interview, I go back through examples. It can be from work, it can be from studies, it can be from travel, it can be from hobbies, it can be from any aspect of your life, any experience you've had that is potentially relevant to the employer and what they're looking for. So I think of these examples and scenarios, these little stories I can tell, and I think, oh, that one's a good example of teamwork, or dealing with conflict, or using my initiative, or doing something innovative, or thinking critically. And then when I go into the interview, even though I don't know exactly what questions they're going to ask me, when they ask a question about a particular strength or competence, I'm going to kind of go through my memory and think, oh, I've got a couple of examples, maybe I'll pull up that one this time. And maybe I've got an example for problem solving, and it's also my best example for communication. So I'm going to pick and choose, and maybe I'll use that little story for talking about problem solving, and then later on there'll be a question about communication. So I'll have another example I can pull up rather than go back to the same example. So if you have these scenarios, examples in your head that in a way you've thought about in these terms, what skills did I use in that scenario? What went on for me? What were the steps in that process? You're going to feel much better prepared and not intimidated about the fact that you don't know exactly what you'll be asked. For me, I think the second stage of preparation after research is kind of your environment, and I think this really comes into play when we're talking about the virtual situation. You'll have already found this when you're engaging in online classes, but it's really important to be in a place where you've got some privacy, there are no distractions around you. You know, it helps if you've got your camera and mic off, that can be a different situation, but engaging in a virtual interview, you're going to have your camera on and you're going to have your mic on, otherwise it's not going to be much of an interview. So no distractions, and think about what those potential distractions can be. Is it going to be your Amazon order turning up at the front door and the doorbell ringing? Is it going to be, in my case, my dog barking because the postman comes to the door? So think about all those potential things. When I was recording a video the other day, he was chewing on a stick, and I thought the mic's going to pick that up, so I got him out of the room. So think about the lack of distractions, because it also means you're going to be able to concentrate. And also think about achieving a neutral background, nothing visually distracting to the people on the other side. And this no door thing, that's as much as anything about if you can control whether somebody's going to come through the door or not. Maybe it's not an issue, but you don't want somebody walking through the door when you're in the middle of an interview. Very practical thing again, if we've got wooden floors, if we don't have any soft furnishings, we can get an echo in the room, and that's going to affect the sound quality. And again, you just don't want any distractions taking the interview away from what you're saying. So carpeting, rugs, things like that, curtains around, all those things absorb sound to stop the echo. And another thing I've noticed, my desk chair that I sit in is on wheels, and it creaks a bit when I move, and that could be distracting for people. So, just have a think about those things. It seems like minute details and kind of overthinking, and it's stuff we don't have to think about when we're going to a company office for an interview, face to face in the olden days. But right now, that's not our reality, and these are things that we need to think about. In terms of where you position yourself, having your face in the centre of the screen, ideally, and not much, below the waist. We need to, again, focus on this area. You not off to the side or cut off at the forehead, because, again, it's just going to be off-putting, a little bit distracting to the interviewer, and the whole impression they'll get is somewhat less professional. So, just think about where you position yourself. And ideally, if you're looking at your screen, your camera should be at eye level or just above, because we all know, we've talked to people and they think they're looking at us, but they're actually looking down here or they're looking up there. And we're trying to simulate eye contact. Eye contact is so key when we're trying to connect with people, and it's so hard to do virtually. But these are the things we can do to try and improve our chances of connecting. Lighting, oh my goodness, there are so many things to think about. You don't need professional lighting, but it can make such a difference. When I'm having my regular work meetings, and this is different, I don't do all this setup when I'm having a meeting with colleagues, right? It doesn't matter so much. There are times though when you've got to pay all attention to details. I often sit in my office at home, and I've got a window to the side, so I kind of get a face half in light and half in shade. So lighting should not be from the side. When I'm in my office upstairs, there's a window behind me, and when I forget to close the blind, this person comes on, we start the meeting, and they say, "I can't see you, Heidi." So I need to close the blind and then potentially put the light on. So sometimes you're going to have to close blinds and curtains. Your ideal is to have the light behind the camera, not the light behind you. And when I was recording the video for the other talk this week, I spent half an hour just getting the right setup so the light was coming from the window, coming from outside in the garden. And I think what surprised me is even though it was a really dark day, it was rainy and miserable, the light worked really well in terms of the light coming through, and I was surprised how well lit I was. I wasn't that excited to see myself in bright lights, but it was really important for the presentation itself. Business attire. Now this is the same obviously if you're attending an interview in person or if you're doing it online, but business attire is really important to send a professional message. I guess, you know, if this works for you, if we're doing it virtually, you can wear your jogging bottoms, you know, as well as your smart suit or shirt and tie, whatever it might be. They need never know, just don't get up out of your seat. But obviously pay attention to what you're wearing and also how you're looking. You know, you don't look like you've not had a shower this morning and you've just got out of bed. You know, all those things apply in terms of making that really positive impression. And the kind of thing, I think, not revealing clothes, I think this goes for men and women. We generally best not to be showing shoulders or low-cut tops, and particularly if the camera's above us. Hopefully, you know, this is kind of good practice. And even jewellery that's either sparkly and could be distracting or kind of jangly jewellery. And I was aware as I put the mic on that I had a necklace on, and I thought, is that potentially going to interfere with the mic? And I hope it's not, but it's something I thought about, you know, as I did that. Final thing to say just on environment is if you're in person, if you're lucky enough to have an interview in person and it works out, plan your journey in advance. Some people would say you would do the journey ahead of time. I wouldn't go that far, but plan your journey, timings, and allow yourself loads of extra time, and check the weather. And this comes to mind because back in the day I was applying for a grad job. It was up in London. I got the journey planned, everything. I was on time, got to Waterloo, walked over the bridge, and the rain started coming down. And I was all dressed for success, looking good, feeling confident. And one thing I didn't have was an umbrella. And I mean, it wasn't just a drizzle. I got absolutely soaked. And I walked into that interview feeling somewhat less professional because I was looking drenched and bedraggled. Somehow I pulled it out the bag and I was offered the job, but it wasn't a good way to start the interview. So that's not an issue if we're doing a virtual interview, but you know, certainly something to bear in mind. Yeah, I just thought this graphic was interesting in terms of room setup for a video call because it just brings attention to some of those things I've talked about. You know, that grey thing in the centre there is actually a rug, which, as I say, can help reduce room echo. The suggestion that things like plants or a bookcase behind you is fine, not too distracting at all. We don't want piles and piles of mess or dirty laundry in there, so you know, something to be thinking about. And we don't want people, ideally, any other people in the frame. I'm going to talk about the technology a little bit in a moment, but it talks there about avoid mixing light sources. You either say you've got a desk lamp in front of you or you're using the natural light, but as I say, it's behind the camera, so it would be at the top of the picture effectively here. Avoid rolling on your chair, as I've already alluded to there, and also be aware of doors for potential distractions. Does anybody know who this chap is? Do you recognise him? Yes, Matt? He's Graham Miller. Who's Graham Miller? Yeah, he's the Executive Dean for FAS. And just the reason why I pulled this up is because this is a video that he recorded just for staff, you know, conveying certain key messages. It's kind of a short and sweet video he does. But I was just thinking about composition. Now, it's worth saying he's not in an interview, so slightly different rules apply. He's doing a recording for staff. How do we think, based on the things I've talked about, how do we feel about this setup? Shout out any thoughts.
The light might change, so that might be interview.
So the window's kind of behind and to the side, and it could change, and that could change the light and might affect things for better or worse. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Green chair.
What about the green chair?
It's just the colour is just too much.
too much. And you might, and the other ones are blue, right? So you're like, where's the green chair when the others are blue? Anything else for anybody? Yeah.
I mean, the table looks a bit cluttered, maybe.
The table looks a bit cluttered, yeah. Now, this is all personal, right? This is your perspective, and some of you will sit and go, looks perfect to me, Heidi, very happy, I'm focused on Graham, no problem here. The point would be that, you know, we can't control what the person who's looking at us is thinking, and anything that potentially distracts them. You notice the green chair, some people wouldn't notice the green chair, but now you're thinking about the green chair, right? So we want to avoid that possibility, and I'm not suggesting he's done a bad job by any means, because I'm sure it's been, you know, slightly different in an interview. And I'm not suggesting she's perfect either. She looks like she's seen a ghost, or has at least received some shocking news. I don't know what that is. But this is to illustrate, again, hopefully, and that is mid-speech, that's why I look like that, but it's kind of fairly central in the frame, a very neutral background, and hopefully the lighting is reasonable there. And again, there are more things we can do to improve, but just think, and this is the talk I talked about this week, where I spent lots of time trying to set it up to get the environment as good as I could, and even then came up against challenges. But it's just important to think about these factors. So the final stage of preparation, I think, is the technology itself, and this is where the virtual interviews as opposed to the real interviews, you know, really comes into play and makes us have to be experts in a hurry. Use a laptop and a monitor if possible. I have my laptop connected to a larger monitor, and find that really helpful, because I think if you're trying to achieve all the things, you know, I've just been talking about on a phone or on a tablet, it's much more challenging. And I've noticed when I'm talking to people on phones, that's when I tend to get just the top of their head or the top of their head cut off. That's going to make it more difficult for you. So if you can organise that, then you're going to be in good shape. Check your internet connections. Seems obvious. The trouble with internet connections, they're working really well for us until the point the meeting comes and suddenly it fails. Be nearest your point where the internet connection comes in, your Wi-Fi points are closer to your modem. That can help you test out different spots, and that doesn't always overlap with the most private and neutral place. So this is why you want to think about it all in advance, not under pressure 5 minutes before the interview. Close competing applications, anything you've got open on your system that is also using the internet is potentially going to be a drain. And I know for a lot of colleagues, when they talk about having their kids upstairs, perhaps gaming or something, and that can throw them off as well. So think about those things that are competing for the Wi-Fi connection or the internet connection. Be aware of the software that will be used in the interview, and make sure you're comfortable with it. I always used to meet with students in person, and now I'm offering the option to meet with students in person or on Microsoft Teams. And part of the reason for that is I'm trying to get students used to using Microsoft Teams and kind of comfortable with that software. Check your sound level. Check you can hear them and they can hear you. Now, you can do a bit of a check at the beginning of the interview, but if you call a friend on Teams beforehand and check that you can hear them, they can hear you, or Zoom, whatever it might be, that would be a good practice run. And whenever possible, use an external microphone. Don't just rely on the one in your laptop. Mine tends to pick up fairly well, I find, but not if you're doing something that's more important like that. Don't rely on that. And again, you only know by testing it out beforehand. I use headphones to cut feedback, kind of in parentheses there, because you can get a feedback situation. Lots of colleagues will have meetings with headphones on, the big headphones with the mic. It's not necessarily what you want to do in an interview situation. So again, that's kind of, you know, I mentioned it if it's going to make a real difference to the quality and it's going to be an issue otherwise, but otherwise it's sometimes nice not to have those big headphones on. If you can, place your webcam at the top of your screen rather than the built-in laptop one, because again, that's when I find I'm looking down. If I've got my monitor and the camera's there, that's where, as I touched on earlier, your eyes can be kind of at the level of the camera, and then the person on the other end feels like you're really looking at them. And I think a good point there, actually, I read the other day, is when you're looking at them, if it's an interview where you can see your interviewer, shrink them and push them up to the top of your screen. So when you're looking at them, you're looking at the camera. Be punctual and schedule so you have plenty of time to be ready, not feel rushed, and make all these preparations. So we've done all this fabulous preparation. We feel like we're good to go. We're now in the interview. You know, it's happening. Remember to deploy your best feature. Now, we're used to looking at a sea of masks nowadays. Obviously, in a virtual interview, we get to take the mask off. You know, one of those rare situations nowadays where people can see our whole face. And I think people miss people's faces, missing seeing people's faces. They're missing seeing your smile. A smile is everybody's best feature without fail. And it's an incredible way of connecting with somebody. Using people's names is and smiling. So don't underestimate that. Make direct eye contact. We've talked about that and the ways we can make that happen, ideally when we're online, by playing with the technology. Your voice is really important in any situation, but I think because when we're online, it takes away so much of that kind of personal element. We need to compensate. We kind of need to up the ante, as it were, and all those factors that surround what we're saying, what we're actually saying. So varying your voice, putting your enthusiasm, engagement in your voice is really key too. And if you smile, people can hear that in your voice. And that's going to be really important as well when you're doing these video interviews when you can't see the other person. You know, they'll be able to see you because it's being recorded, but really try and imagine you're talking to somebody and not just to yourself. So emphasise those non-verbals more. But something to say about hand gestures, not everybody uses their hands to speak, so don't do it if it's not comfortable to you, and don't be waving them all over the screen either. I think it's really important to just try and imagine yourself from their perspective, and again, maybe this is ambitious again, this scenario where people are actually sat in a room together, but what I'm saying is, you know, if you're the person on the big screen there, think about what they're seeing and how they're experiencing how they're seeing you. And I think it's important to say that very few people are excited about or comfortable about being seen in this way. It's taken me a long time to get used to kind of taking selfies. I've never liked having my photo taken or being recorded, and I'm having to get used to it pretty quickly. But it's really important to think, what is the experience the person on the other end is getting? And you can do a lot to manage that, and that's really what I've been focusing on today. Just a quick one here. I'm sure we've all seen these kind of things about sitting up, and we know what correct posture is, and if you work in an office, you'll have an evaluation that your desk chair is in the right position and your head should be stacked on top of your spine, etc. But if you are conscious about this and you're set up when you're sat there and about to do this interview, maybe you want to stand up, but most likely you'll be sitting, and get your posture correct and just get used to sitting there. Think, do I need to raise my chair up? What kind of chair are you sitting in? I started remote working at my dining table in a dining chair. Wasn't comfortable for long at all. So then I went back to kind of a proper office setup. If you're in this position and you've got the right posture, you're going to be in a really strong starting position. The same as if you're presenting. You always say to people, try and find a kind of a strong starting position rather than doing this and it's already putting you off balance. So think about that as well as you're creating that setup. Now, moving away from all of that kind of visual stuff, if you like, I want to focus finally on questions, because these are key part of interviews. And as I've said, we can't predict exactly what questions we're going to get, but we can have lots of preparation thinking about the experiences we've had and what evidence they give about us. Competency-based is a very common type of interviewing question that they ask in interviews. They're trying to establish they want certain things from you. Perhaps they want somebody who's a leader, a problem solver, demonstrates initiative, self-motivated, great communicator, and so on. They should have shared those with you. It's very rare recruiters won't share what they're looking for. And then in the interview, they're going to ask questions that try and get at that. And again, they don't want you to just say, oh yeah, no, I'm a great communicator, take my word for it, yeah, we're good to go. You know, they're going to want really good, strong examples and evidence of that. I think though we're telling stories, as I talked about these scenarios, these vignettes we've kind of got in our mind from our lives, it's important to always be really focused and concise when you're sharing those with employers. and answer the question you were asked. It's very tempting for us to prepare and go, I've got a brilliant answer, let's hope they ask me this question. And they don't, or they ask something kind of related, and you think, oh, I can take the answer I prepared, I'm sure I can shoehorn it into the response to that question. Answer the question that they're asking you. There are a couple of approaches in terms of answering these kind of questions when you're giving examples or evidence of what you've done. And I'm sure a lot of people will have heard particularly of the STAR approach. This one entails situation, task, action and result. So you talk about, what was the situation? You're painting the picture, you're giving the context. What was the task in question? You talk about the action. They don't want to know about general, vague stuff. They want you to get very specific very quickly. Action, and that's not what action did we as a team take, it's what action did you take specifically. They're interviewing you, not your best mates, not the other people in your team. They're asking you. And they also want to know what the outcome is. And I think it's important to say here too that they're not looking for something that always ends, beautifully shiny. It doesn't always end with a happy ending as such. It can be about mistakes you've made. It can be about things you've learned based on experiences you've had, or maybe you didn't get it right first time. But it's about the outcome. What have I learned from that? And what can I offer you as an employer as a result? So the STAR is the first approach, which gives context, explains what you did and the outcome. And P is the second approach. I think it's a less glamorous name, this one. I believe this one is perhaps used in schools to help you kind of frame how you provide answers or create responses to things. And this is about making the point, providing evidence, an example or examples, and then the explanation, so really tying it back. And in the case of answering a question for employer, tying that back is kind of about saying, and this is why it's going to be important doing this role, or this is why it's going to help you or it's relevant to your organisation. So make your point, explain and develop the evidence, and make sure you're linking that back so it's clear why you've given that example. In terms of common questions, there are many possibilities. You can go online and you'll find a gazillion of them. I think it's helpful to look at these questions and just practice. I used to, go for a walk and I'd just be practicing, imagining I was asked a certain question and how might I respond to that. But equally, we don't want to give rehearsed answers. They're looking for authenticity. But it's just a selection of questions there just for, you to read through. I'm not going to go through and give you answers to all of these. But just, I think, gives you a flavour of the kind of range of questions that you might be asked. And they're competency-based questions, but not all of these are competency-based questions. What are your career aspirations, I think, is a very natural question for them to ask. And they're not trick questions, they're trying to find out about you. And remember, they're trying to get the best out of you as well. They know it's a performance situation, they know there's anxiety, but they're trying to get the best out of you. And I think the last thing I want to kind of draw attention to is your questions. I think this is something that's often overlooked. We get so focused on how we're going to respond to theirs and what they might ask us, and we forget that we are interviewing them the same as they are interviewing us. They might love us and offer us a job, and we might decide that it's not for us. And actually, the example I gave you when I turned up very wet, bedraggled, and had 5 interviews in the course of the day, and I did get offered the job. And I said thanks, but no thanks, because it wasn't right for me, because I was interviewing them, and it just wasn't the right fit for me. And having had the day in the office, in that case, and the 5 interviews showed me that was the case. So do have your own questions ready to go. Don't do the bit at the end where the interviewer says, do you have any questions for me, or do you have any questions for us? Oh, you've done a fabulous job, you've answered all my questions for me. They might have, which means you've got quite a list. Oh, thank you. Yes, I do have a couple of questions here. And I think there's all sorts of things. Questions that indicate you've really paid attention, you're picturing yourself in the organisation are really good ones. So asking about possibilities for progression, or what might a normal day look like. Asking the interviewer their experience, you know, and it might be that you've had a look, if you're smart, had a look at them at LinkedIn in advance, if you know who's interviewing, you found out about, oh, I noticed that your background is, or I noticed you've been here 5 years, so what's kept you here, or how did you get to your position in the organisation, or what are the 3 things that you think really make somebody stand out in this organisation? Have some really good questions ready to go, and as that's the end of the interview and the finishing point, I think it's really important to finish on a positive note. And if you've made a great impression with asking some really strong questions, that's going to be a really positive note to finish on. So remember, as a final note, it's a two-way thing. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So you're both responsible for making it successful. And it means you have power as an interviewee as well. They represent the organisation, and so how they make you feel is going to impact whether you're attracted to that organisation, if you're lucky enough to get an offer, whether you're going to want to accept that offer or not. And make sure by the time you've left that interview, you found out everything you need to in order to make that decision. So that comes back to those questions you're asking. And I would just encourage you to be yourself, be authentic, be honest, don't make anything up, you don't need to. You've got all sorts of fabulous things to offer, you don't need to be dishonest, and it will backfire big time. And bear in mind that you are here because they already think you're pretty special, and you've got here when you've got all this competition who's not now sat in this position. Which leads me to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, for such a brilliant presentation on the interview process, what we should remember, some tips, what we shouldn't do. I know it's tempting to sit in your pajamas when you're being interviewed at home, but yeah, thank you for that. So we will begin with questions from the audience. So if anybody would like to ask Heidi? Yeah.
I've got a question. Do you have any tips for handling rejection, picking yourself back up, and continuing to try again for other roles at different companies?
So yes, the question is about, do I have, as I understand it, any kind of advice for rejection when you get turned down? How do you pick yourself back up and get back on it? I would say to people, take some time to feel frustrated, disappointed, sad, whatever it might be. I think that's really important, and however you handle that, whether you rage, whether you go and cry with your best friend, whatever you need to do to get that out of your system, do it. And I say take a day or so to do that, and then put it behind you. It feels very personal, of course it does, but again, I think particularly when you've got to a further stage in the process, if you're talking about interviews, you've come so far. I think that's the thing you've got to focus on, and you've beaten a lot of competition to get that far. And I think one thing that helps me is to think that there are a lot of us who might be able to offer the same kind of skills or qualities or experiences. In terms of working with other people, we've got to fit into that team. And that can sometimes just come down to particular qualities about us, our personality. And teams change all the time. There's lots of turnover. So I often say, you're the person that didn't get it this time. In 6 months' time or a year's time, that team could have changed and you'd actually be the right person at a different time. So it's not necessarily that you've done the wrong things. Keep doing the good stuff and move forward. And I think my final point on that, it's a bit like maybe if I come back to the relationship, dating, dream person kind of thing. Sometimes when something doesn't work out, it's really disappointing and you've got really fixed up. That was my dream job. That's the one I really wanted. And if we're focused on the dream job, we miss what's over here. We don't see something that's potentially around the corner. And I always think in life, the things disappointments like that, you pick yourself up and you carry on, and suddenly you see the thing around the corner that otherwise you'd totally have missed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that brilliant question, and thank you for that lovely answer.
So when in the actual interview, what is the best tip for if you get stuck? So like you get asked a question, you get stuck, what's the best way to not make the interviewer think that you are stuck?
Okay. So when you're in an interview, if you kind of get stuck, you don't know how to answer a question, what's the best way to deal with that so that not to draw attention to it? I think that's an excellent question again. And it's a tricky one because you might potentially get stuck and really have no answer to something. And I think it's best not to try and bluff your way through something if you really don't have an answer for it. I think the first thing is if you need time, just give yourself a couple of moments. You know, if you jump straight in with an answer, they're going to think this person had pre-prepared it. You know, that's not entirely natural either. So, you know, just to say that's a very good question. And just give yourself a moment in silence to think about it. And so try to compose an answer. And it might not be the perfect answer, but do think about what they're asking. You might also think, what are they really getting at here? It looks like one thing, maybe they're getting at a competence. And so if you focus in on, I think they're asking me about, you know, my resilience here. I've got an example for that. But if you really get stuck, and you don't have an answer, then it's perfectly okay to say so. To say, you know, I'm sorry, I don't feel I can answer that question. Can we move on? You know, it's because it's unlikely, but it's possible it can happen. Or you could ask them to rephrase the question if you feel you haven't necessarily understood the question.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any more questions?
Yeah, thank you for your talk, Heidi. So I was just wondering, have you ever been on the other side of an interview where you've been the interviewer? And what sort of candidate did you go for? Or do you have any specific stories or examples of where a candidate really stood out to you?
I think that's a really good question. So if I've been on the other side as the interviewer and experienced a candidate who's really kind of stood out or, you know, has put in a good performance that has made me choose that person. I can't think of any kind of particular instances that stand out, because I think for me it's about connection, it's about first impressions, you know, and that's something I'm always talking to people about. We make a first impression, we form that first impression in seconds, and there's something called the halo effect, which is problematic. So if we form a great first impression in seconds, everything the interviewer thinks after that is going to want to confirm that they were right, that you're great. Whereas if we make a negative first impression, everything that follows, they're going to make it fit their original, you know, snap judgment, unfortunately, that you're not right. So I think, you know, for me, it's when somebody walks through the door, the handshake back in the day, and it's like, how do we compensate for that now? But the confidence that comes with a firm handshake, with direct eye contact, when people use your name, when they smile, when you feel that they're really being authentic and kind of natural as much as possible when you know they're nervous. I think those are the things that really stand out for me, because you know that in a working situation, whether they're dealing with clients, colleagues, suppliers, wherever it may be, relationships are so key. So if they can make that connection in those situations, even if they haven't got all the answers or all the skills yet, that's going to get them through a lot. So I do tend to think there are people I know in life, not even in an interview situation, who you just go, they're going to do fine. They're going to do fine because they've got that kind of way with people. And that doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. It just means that you've got to be able to connect with people. So I think I'd say that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the audience? Yeah? Okay. Well, so we have had some questions from the live. These were sent in advance, so anybody still watching online, please do send them through. But yeah, I will start off with our first question, which is, how much research would you say someone should do about a company before the interview?
Ooh. I mean, and what do we mean by how much? I would say a lot. I don't know how we quantify, but it's less about how much. It's like, do we quantify that in terms of hours kind of spent online, as it were? It's more about what kind of research. So it's about, you know, what is their business How long have they been established? Who are their competitors? You know, what's going on in the industry they sit in? How has their business evolved over time? What are the challenges for them right now? What projects have they been involved in? What initiatives? I think these are all sorts of things that are going to impress an organisation. I hear lots of examples of interviews when they say, what have we done recently that's really impressed you? Or what really attracts you to us? Or what do you think of this project we're doing? And the interviewee says, I don't know about that. And it's something they're really proud of. So if they're really proud of it, it's probably on their website. It could have been in the news. It would be in the business press. So again, I'm going to come back to this dating example. You know, I sometimes say, if we were going on a lot of blind dates, and to each one we turned up and went, I'm sorry, what's your name again? And I know we chatted online, but I've met so many people this week, I really can't remember you as separate to somebody else. I think employers know, and they would be crazy if we weren't applying to several of them at the same time, but they want to feel special. They want to feel like we really do want to work for them, and we've spent the time to find out. And so one way we can demonstrate that is by putting the time into that research and answering those kind of questions which will very commonly come up at interview. So I think it's more about what kind of research as opposed to how much.
Yeah, thank you for that. So our second question is, how should graduates approach negotiating pay?
Ooh, that's a good meaty one. I think that depends on the situation. Sometimes jobs are advertised with a salary range, so you know kind of where you are. If they've advertised a salary range, they're probably not going to step out of that. If it's a range, there is always the option to go to the top end of the range, and I think it's perfectly reasonable whenever we're negotiating, you know, aim high, you know, there's no problem with that, but be realistic at the same time. But I think if they'd been very clear, this is the salary and it's non-negotiable, you have to accept that. But I think it's that rule in life, if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you go to them and you don't bring it up and it's a range, don't be surprised if they maybe put you in at the bottom of the range. And I've had an example that happened to me. I applied for a job, it had a range in salary. When they made the offer kind of in the middle of the salary range. And I assumed, based on my experience and qualifications, that was right. And it wasn't until I got in the job, somebody told me, oh, we'd have paid you right at the top of the range, and started off like, oh. So lesson learned there. But equally, they could have turned around, I could have said, well, I'd like to accept your offer, but here's my number, and it's at the top of the range. And if they'd come back and said, thank you, we want to have you, and you're great, but no, this is our top offer. Don't be afraid. I think sometimes people are afraid if you ask and say, well, actually, I'd like that level, that they're going to say, no, how rude of you, we're taking the job offer back. They're not going to do that, and if they do, it's a strange employer, I think. So, but always be professional and polite about it.
Thank you. Good tip there, guys. Good. The next question is, what would an interviewer expect you to answer when asking you about yourself? Should it be more related to professional and work-life experiences, or like myself in general?
Oh, another excellent question. These are all real goodies, and it's great that you're all thinking in this way. Hard to know, and if we want to understand from our interviewer what they want from us, then we get to ask them a question. We don't answer all their questions with a question, that won't get you anywhere. But actually to say, would you like me to give more personal examples or professional or a mixture of both? Why not ask a clarifying question? So I think that's the answer, not necessarily play guess what's on their mind, because it saves everybody's time if you're answering the question that they want you to answer. I think in terms of the professional side of things, the personal side of things, we need to be aware there's certain things that aren't on the table in terms of recruitment, because we can be discriminated against on that basis. So they're kind of not fair game in an interview. The same as you wouldn't put on your CV, your marital status, your sexuality, your political beliefs, your religious orientation, etc., etc. Those don't impact our ability to do the job. So again, those aren't fair game. And when we get into personal examples in interviews, sometimes we might give an example that suggests some of those things. So again, it's not wrong or right, but I think we just need to be conscious about that. That if we're giving those examples, maybe it's because we're making a choice. We want the employer to know that this is something that's very important to us and very central to who we are. And in that case, that's absolutely fine.
Brilliant, thank you. Someone has also asked, any advice about how to appear more confident during an interview?
Ooh, yes, and it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one when we're nervous, for all of us. I think, we talked a bit about kind of posture in this, and body language is a key thing. I think going back to the old-fashioned, just taking a deep breath, pacing yourself, giving yourself time. I talked about that, never be in a hurry, never feel under pressure, don't turn up soaking wet. Those things that help you feel calmer would be really important. Dress so that you feel comfortable, and if you don't feel comfortable in kind of business attire, put it on a bit beforehand, get used to it, get some feedback from people so you feel a bit more comfortable rather than feeling like, I don't feel like myself, when I'm in this get-up. So if you can find some clothing that does the job of being professional but makes you feel good and feel confident. I think, as I say, those basics about whenever I go into that situation, literally I try and calm my mind, take a deep breath and say, in these initial seconds where I'm going to make a first impression, my brains, could just short circuit, and I tell myself, smile, use their name, give my name. So even giving yourself a mini script for that initial bit. What am I going to say first? What if they say that? Or a little bit of small talk. What would I say as small talk? Or, if you're going to, what a beautiful office. Or, I noticed this, whatever it might be that helps you break the ice a little bit. But again, I think it's preparation, and it's mental preparation in that case. And also let yourself off the hook and accept none of us are excited and super confident generally going into interviews. It's a performance situation that affects all of us.
Brilliant, thank you. Just a few more questions. So this is a bit more for you, but what is the number one interview tip you've received yourself?
Ooh, good question. I don't know. I'm a bad person for what's your favourite movie or number one, because I think there's no such thing as one of things in that sense. So I'd say I've shared with you, everything today. I think all those things, but I think if anything, be yourself and be authentic, because you're fabulous. Nobody said that exactly to me. I'd like to, but that's what I'd say to you, because it's true.
Right. There you go. So how should students approach the question, tell us about yourself?
Ooh, tell us about yourself. And I think that's a bit like the one we got earlier about the personal and professional piece. Everybody should have a 1 minute elevator pitch, right? Have people heard of that 1 meter elevator, or lifts as we call them? But basically, the way of thinking about it, maybe you've got an opportunity, you're going to see at a company or something, an internship, and you get into the lift, and the CEO of the company is in the lift, and they say, hey, don't believe you've met before, and you've got to make that count, make that moment count. So it's trying to put into a minute kind of who you are, giving a bit of bit of your personality again, because that's the bit that connects us to people, not right, you should know I've been in this society and I was the leader of, and these are all the things I've achieved. I've had many awards. That's going to turn people off, right? So it's about that personal piece again. So I think it's about, in that 1 minute, sharing kind of your main successes and achievements in some way, but also what are you most proud of, what makes you you, and sharing something that makes you uniquely you. We all need a USP, and that doesn't mean that we have a super talent or a genius that nobody else is. It's the thing that makes us distinctively us.
Thank you. Going back to the question before about addressing the interviewer when you're feeling confident, when would you say is like the best time to use the interviewer's first name, or like would you say to use their first name or not?
These such good questions. names are very powerful. They're a way of connecting with people. We identify very much with our name. I think generally nowadays first name terms and in the workplace are much more common and normal. If you don't feel comfortable about doing it, certainly use a name, but you could then use their title. And then what you'd hope is, say, oh, Mrs. Smith, it's such a pleasure to be here. And say, oh, please call me Sarah, whatever it might be. So if you're not comfortable, you can do that for the more formal and let them give you their first name or invite you to use the first name. But use a name. Don't be afraid of, because you're not sure how you should address them, don't avoid the name. And the other thing, and I deal with this all the time, dealing with students, and I've got a surname that people don't know how to pronounce, and it's the case for lots of us here. We've got a real kind of range of names. What I prefer to do is, when I first interact with somebody, I use their name, and then I say, is that how you pronounce your name? Or you can just say, hello, lovely to meet you. Sorry, can I just check, how do you pronounce, oh, that's a beautiful name, how do you pronounce that? Oh, that's a really interesting name. And I think a name's a good way to open up a connection as well. A lot of people say to you, where's your name from? So then you get a personal connection straight away there. So names can be kind of gold dust there, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Heidi. That was actually our last question. But yeah, I will hand over to Anita, and she will conclude our event for today. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Heidi, again for coming. It was a lovely talk. I think we can never hear enough about CVs and interviews now that we're all practicing for the real world. Thanks everyone for coming, people who are here live. Thanks everyone that's on the YouTube live. I would just like to remind everyone that from today onwards until the 30th, we will have mock interviews and CV checks for anyone who's interested. It will be on the Business Society Business Society social media. And thank you everyone. Bye.
Thank you.